Welcome back to Zenith Poker. In this tutorial, we'll be continuing with small blind versus big blind 2-bet pots, specifically looking at the connected high boards, and then on the turn and river, we'll be looking at some of the flush completing runouts. So let's start things off with good old Ace King Queen. So here, if we look at this Ace King Queen board, there's a fair amount of flop betting with a lot of these two pairs for a fairly big size. You got 75 and pot being used, with sort of top two, Ace Queen, and even bottom two being used a lot of the time. In contrast, those top two lots of sets, set of aces, set of kings, betting small or checking, going for a sort of a check raise, or if it checks through, then you would play accordingly. So a lot of this, the Ace X isn't super strong on this board because on Ace King Queen, there's even though it's very, very strong for the small blind, the big blind's still going to have some stuff like the two pairs of King Queen and plenty of Ace X. So it's one of those boards that often you're quite far ahead or you're fairly far behind. And of course, there is still the straight of Jack 10 and a lot of straight draws. Any Jack X or any 10X is a straight draw. Okay, so let's have a look at sort of this checking line. Here, check on the flop. The big blind's going to check back a lot. If the big blind just bets small, then it's fairly easy to defend. I mean, you're just folding any of these unmade hands. There's something like half pot, still the same. Like they're folding these very weak pocket pairs. I'm pretty happy to let go of them and basically just continuing with any pair on the board. And a lot of these straight draws these gut shot straight draws will continue as well. So fairly easy to defending. It's a small bet. Against these bigger bets, there's going to be a fair bit more folding. Sign up fold sort of middle pair and weak pair. So knowing when to fold middle pair on the flop is a very important skill. And so on boards like this, where like there's an ace and then you've got a king and a queen, there's a bunch of two pairs, a bunch of straights that you can defend with. Middle pair on the flop is not very strong, so just letting it go. And also it doesn't draw very well. So basically you're continuing all the time with any of these middle pairs with any kind of additional draw. Let's say, for example, it goes check, bet, call, and now we look at the turn reports and we can see the flush completing turn cards is pretty bad for this small blind. In contrast, a king, a queen, or an ace is really good for the small blind, and we will be looking at some of these pairing cards a bit later. So let's have a look at one of these flush completing cards. Let's go with the three of spades. So three of spades, there's the equity at 55%, only 9% flushes versus 15.3% flushes. A lot of the flush draws for the big blind have bet on the flop, and so when it goes bet call, the big blind is pretty far ahead in terms of the amount of flushes that they have. And of course, there's still the Jack 10 straight, King Queen for two pair, and sort of Ace 10, Ace Jack, Ace 10, Ace 9 type hands. So when the flush completes, usually you're going to be betting. If you're in position, usually you're going to be betting relatively small. So here's a half pot bet, and the reason for that is you still want to be able to get value with some of these top pairs and two pair hands, and with the intention of sort of checking back on a fair few rivers that don't really improve your hand. So for example, there, the half pot bet, call, river brick. A lot of these top pairs are just checking back. Even this two pair of king queen is checking back on the river. So that's kind of the intention there. And then obviously, if you get raised, you're in a tough spot. If you end up betting too big, your opponents will start to fold a lot of the hands that you're trying to get value from, and so it doesn't end up working out for you when you've got like a top pair or two pair hand. So top pair and two pair betting relatively small, very well protected by these flushes and straights. So if you get raised, that's not too big of a deal. You can just follow all those top pairs that are bet for value, and obviously a lot of your bluffs as well. So don't worry too much about getting check raised when you've got a top pair, because it's not going to happen too often, because you've got a bunch of strong hands in your range compared to the opponent who has only check called that flop bet. So big blind head in the flushes, and then when it goes sort of just bet call on the turn here, there's some very big betting with sort of the straights and the flushes. So looking at this, you've got this pot size bet with a straight a good chunk of the time, and then sort of this 1.5 pot bet with a flush a lot of the time. So not nice big chunky bets, and then if you're defending out of position, you're just going to jam a flush because the flush is a flush. Shouldn't be too scared of it. A lot of weaker players would be fairly weak, and then kind of do stuff like checking back a straight or something ridiculous like that. And the reason being is because like this size that they choose is on the flop on the turn aren't so great. Should we look at a slightly different line to compare? So that was the check bet call line on the flop, and we can look at sort of a similar line. If we say, for example, we bet half pot on the flop out of the small blind, and then we look at the turn report after the call. Same kind of thing for the small blinds. Small blinds doing a lot better on these flush completing cards because they're basically continuing all the flush draws against a small bet. Even a pot size bet, flush draws are always continuing. So in position, overbet, slight overbet 1.5 times a pot. Some of the very weakest flush draws are folding, but anyway, so bet call. So in this bet call line, the flush comes in, not great in terms of equity for the out of position player. Sure, some of the flush draws which out of position used to sort of bluff with here have made it, but a lot of the time they were kind of bluffing with these gut shots. Here you've got sort of this 44.6% gut shots in this flop betting range. There's a lot of gut shots, and so when the flush completes and the gut shot doesn't, it's a lot better for the small blind. Sorry, a lot better for the big blind than the small blind. The gut shots have missed. The small blind's made a bunch of flushes, and so it's not so great. So the sizing down once again, same kind of idea as previously on the turn, where sort of they were betting half pot in position. Here out of position on a slightly more dicey run out for the Rangers, can bet slightly smaller, sort of like a block bet. Remembering out of position doesn't really have to beat a huge amount, even though top pair is most likely ahead. You don't have to beat a huge amount to bet small as like a block, because if you check, the stronger hands are going to bet into you anyway, and a lot of the time you're just going to have to be check calling with some of these top pairs. So some of these top pairs bet small, and then they get called a little bit by worse, and then we see the river, and then these top pairs check and then go into sort of this defense mode. Middle pairs checking back, and weak pairs sort of checking back, and then if like your opponent has a strong hand, they're going to be betting into you anyway. So like, your hand doesn't play out so well. So there with sort of a hand like ace6, ace5, ace4, your EV isn't super high. So out of a pot of 18, like an ace4 type hand's got an EV around 5 or 6, about a third of the pot. After it goes bet call here, because you're checking, and then like either your opponent checks back, and sometimes you'll win the pot with your third kicker, so ace, king, queen, and then your kicker, or your opponent will check back a stronger ace, and that happens sometimes after this line. And sometimes your opponent's going to be checking back a king or a queen, which is nice. And a lot of weaker opponents won't bluff like some of these weaker pocket pairs and whatever. And they might not even call some of these pocket pairs against this small bet on the turn here. I mean, all of them have a flush draw, so they might be calling them, but they might not decide to bluff them on the river. which is even nicer for you. Then you can make this sort of small block bet with sort of top pair, and if you get raised, that sucks. But if you checked, your opponent would have bet the same hand that they had raised you with, and you're in the same kind of spot, right? Yeah. All right, let's have a look at another one just to hammer the point in. King Queen 9. King Queen 9. A lot of small betting here. So bet small, call, and once again, all the flushes are better for the big blind. Let's have a look at one of the flush and straight completing cards. So let's have a look at the 10 of spades. So here you've got the flush and the straight coming at the same time. Looking at the percentages, a lot of straights for the small blind, but not too many flushes. But in comparison, there's more flushes for the big blind and slightly less straights. So the 10 of spades coming in completes both the flush and the straight. Any jack is now a straight, and there's the flush that's coming as well. All right, so the equity for the small blind is dropped significantly, and that's mainly due to the fact that a lot of hands have caught up. And against this quarter pot bet on the flop, there's just going to be a lot of drawing from hands like the flush draws and the gut shots. Such a small bet, basically any flush draw, any gut shot is going to continue. Any flush draw is obviously going to continue. So when the 10 of spades comes in, having both of those types of hands improve means that a lot of the strong hands like two pair and sets and stuff on the flop are no longer super strong. So set is down here in sort of no longer in the top 25% of hands, like the flush and the straight is the top 25% of hands for the small blind. And if you really understand sort of the relative range strength, a hand that's not in the top 25% of your opponent's ranges is not a super strong hand. So a set here isn't very strong. A lot of players will understand that intuitively, and here even the big blinds got closer to 30% straights and flushes. Okay, so very bad card comes in, checking at a very high frequency, and then sure the big blind's going to be checking back to try and draw, but the big blind is going to be betting in to the small blind at a pretty high frequency, and the kinds of hands that are betting are a lot of these flushes and straights. So this flush and straight. So look at sort of the range composition of this pot size bet. The range composition of this pot size bet, mostly flushes, 27% flushes, 16% straights, and then basically a lot of these pocket pairs with some kind of very weak flush draw or set draw is making the pot size bet as well. A lot of weaker opponents won't know that they should be sort of betting these pocket pairs here. When you think about kind of which hands you can use to outdraw your opponent, like when you're looking at a board like this and the straights there and the flushes there, like what hands are you trying to make indifferent? And like the hands you're trying to make indifferent are sort of like this top pair, two pair type stuff. And it's very difficult to outdraw that kind of naturally, right? A lot of these hands, all these offsuit hands with a flush draw are also a pair on the board, so you don't really want to use them because they've got too much showdown value. So the only hands with minimum showdown value and some kind of draw are these pocket pairs. And some of these pocket pairs also will have a spade to try and draw to the next to a flush if the next spade comes out. But a lot of them also have two outs to draw to a set, and that set has suddenly then outdrawn the two pair and top pair, second pair type hands in the small ones range. So pot size bet, all the two pairs are calling. There's aces you have to try and outdraw, and some of these top pairs as well. So all these top pairs and middle pairs are folding. The two pairs are indifferent. So if you're trying to make two pair indifferent, your bluffs need to outdraw two pair, right? So what kinds of hands on this board can outdraw two pair? it's either an offsuit hand, but a lot of these offsuit hands have already made a pair on the board, so you don't really want to use them because they've got too much showdown value. So the only option is those pocket pairs here. So remember that when you're facing this sort of spot when you're trying to make 2 pair indifferent on the turn. And it might not seem like a lot of equity, but it is some equity, and compared to other hands in your range, it's actually a really good candidate to be using these low pocket pairs on the turn here. For example, bet call. Let's have a look at like a 4 of hearts check, and then this set checks back. Suddenly it's outdrawn those 2 pairs, but it's getting too dicey because the density of straights and flushes is far too much in the out of position player's range. And so basically just checking back and knowing that they've outdrawn some of the hands. Anyone here with pocket 2s can win against ace highs, a little bit of ace high. Yeah, ace high nut flush draw, which is missed. Check, and then the weaker flushes are going for like this, a slight overbet. Stronger flushes going for an even bigger overbet, and then some of the nut flushes are just ripping it all in. And so then, like at this kind of stage on the turn, you're making 2 pair indifferent. On the river, you're making a straight indifferent. So, and then obviously there's flushes which are pretty good, and all these straights will just check back on the river. All these jack X straights. The only non-straight hand that's continuing betting is this ace jack, which is the nut straight. It's only betting 3/4 pot, and it's getting, and when it gets jammed into it's indifferent there. Okay, so hopefully that highlights what happens when the flush comes in. So better for the big blind and the small blind, and you're going to have some very interesting lines to look at. Okay, so next thing we want to look at is sort of when the board pairs itself on the turn. So that's King Jack 9. So here King Jack 9, still ahead for the small blind on the flop, betting small. And now let's have a look at the turn report, and we'll see which of these turn cards kind of favors when the turn pairs itself. So we've got 3 options for which of the turn cards pair themselves. We've got either the king, the jack there, and then the 9. So 9 being all the way at the bottom here is basically saying that the 9 is really good for the big blind. King is reasonable for the small blind. I mean, it's in the top half, but it's not all of them. And then jack is also down towards the bottom. And that kind of makes sense. I mean, 1/4 pot bet, you're continuing with all the 9x and all the jack x against this very small bet on the flop. In contrast, the small blind doesn't really bet all of those hands at the fullest frequency, betting top pair slightly more often than sort of middle pair and 9x. So when the 9 comes in, it is pretty good for the small blind. Sorry, pretty good for the big blind. So the here when the 9 comes in, equity's dropped off quite a lot, and you still got to be worried about you still got to be worried about a 9 now. So when you got like this top pair, you're not super confident putting a lot of money in. So these top pairs, once again, they're making sort of this small block bet, remembering that a 9 will bet into you all the time anyway after you check, right? And there's a variety of different sizes that they could use, and then especially on the river. But you can still get a little bit of value from like a middle pair type hand or a weaker top pair. That's why all this ace king, king queen, king jack is 2 pair. But the same kind of idea, betting small and trying to get called by worse. Let's have a look at this. If there's a check. When the 9 comes in, the out of position player is going to have a lot of flush draws still, going to have a lot of straight draws still. And because the 9 is a relative brick for those draws, and it's really good for the big blind, the small blind is going to have to be checking a lot. And the reason why they're going to have to be checking a lot is because those weak hands really want to try and draw and hope that it goes check on the turn here. And so that checking range needs to be protected. And if it's not protected, then those draws will basically essentially just lose all of their draw equity, because if you just check a range comprised of very weak hands, just such as just a lot of draws. Your opponent will just bet their entire range into you, and you'll have trouble. So if you've got a very strong hand like a set of kings, set of jacks, has stuff like king nine full house. So like these full houses, a lot of them are checking at a pretty high frequency, and they're checking with the intention of going for a check raise either here or on the river. And the size of these check raises is quite big. So this is a check raise of this is a twice pot check raise, I think it is. Yeah, it's twice pot, 1.5 times pot. I don't remember what settings I used, but very big check raise. So here there's this very strong check raise with the set of kings, king nine, set of jacks. Going for the big size, and then for the slightly smaller check raise with just the trips with the 9x, going for that very small size. And this queen nine is a pretty good draw. Queen 9, 10 9, pretty nice hand to draw. Ace 9, queen 9 having a pretty good kicker. Ace 9 having a pretty good kicker. And so they'll do well by going for a small check raise. So quarter pot, and now folding all of those missed draws from the flop. Once again, in order for the big blind to be able to get to this node, they have to have called this 1.5 big blind bet on the flop. So don't be afraid to, even though this is folding more than alpha. Remember, alpha for a quarter pot bet is 20%, folding 36%, and that's because of this 1.5 big blind or 25% pot bet on the flop, which the big blind had to pay in order to get to this node in the tree. So for example, I mean, once you understand that you've got these hands here, this 10-8 is the open ender, queen 8 is a gut shot with a flush draw, queen 7 gut shot flush draw, queen 6 gut shot flush draw, going for this big pot size bet, and like what hands are you trying to make indifferent? You're trying to make all these top pairs indifferent, even some of these weaker 9x hands indifferent, so weaker trips indifferent, because the value component is full house or kind of the straight queen 10. And then on the river, the hand kind of plays itself. You're just ripping it in with all the value component, and then you're just check folding the bluffs all the time. Yeah, even if the flush comes in, it's not really changing too much. A straight feels a bit dicey, but on pretty much every other river, unless I think the straight comes in. But basically all these brick rivers, it's pretty easy to play. You just rip it in with your boats and your straights and basically everything else. And then you've got a lot of bluffs here, and then a bunch of hands will just give up now. So remember to have those give ups, otherwise you're over bluffing. So for example, check call instead, check, and then they're just going to be betting trips and stronger in the river. I mean, some of the two pairs, the king jack, pot size bet there, and then you've got this boat which jams on the river. So that's why like a lot of these boats have just gone for the check line on the turn, because and even gone for check call sometimes, because you end up in this river node where you can just jam over your opponent. And remember, because of the 50% rule, they're going to be they're usually going to be betting about half the time on the river, and usually more than half the time. It depends on the range construction. For both players, it's going to be betting pretty frequently on the river there. So if they're betting half the time and you've got sort of the set of kings, it's pretty good. Yeah. So let's have a look at another example quickly. There's queen jack. So ace queen jack. So looking at sort of the different bet sizes here while it loads. Got this pot size bet, slight over bet, and all this quarter pot bet. So looking at that, which hands are going for the pot size bet? Is this ace queen, ace jack? Which hands are and sort of this king 10 for the straight? So it's already starting to polarize pretty significantly on the flop. So looking at the pot size bet line, what hands are being used as the value component? As we said, 2 pairs straights and some of the very strong top pairs, ace king, and then some of these weaker top pairs being thrown in there at a decent frequency and being used as sort of like the check on the turn. And then down here, a lot of these unmade hands are open enders with the 10-9, 10-8, right? Having the king or the other gut shot on the other side. Some of these gut shots with just random king x and 10x and even 9x. Sorry, 9-8. And some of these backdoor flush draw type hands being thrown in there at very low frequency. So, for example, 7-5, 7-6 is being thrown in there. So here 6-5, 7-5, and notice like the 7-5, 6-4, 6-3. Only doing it with a backdoor flush draw. It doesn't make sense to do it without the backdoor flush draw. If you're on a board like this, like it's really important to have a backdoor flush draw if you're just going to airball it, because you need some equity in order to outdraw one of these pairs, and it's pretty difficult to outdraw an overpair when you've got 2 undercards. So you do it with a backdoor equity. So we'll have a look at that. This pot size bet, and notice all these top pairs are calling, middle pairs are calling, weak pairs are calling. There's no raises here. So you want to guess which of the board pairing cards aren't so good? Obviously, the queen and the jack aren't doing so well. The 9 completes some straights. And we'll have a look at the queen and the jack later, but first we'll have a look at the ace. So the ace isn't doing too bad because there's a lot of ace x in this big flop betting range. Remember, we looked at some of these weaker top pairs being thrown in there, and that's because they can check and then defend on other turn cards. So, for example, the 5 of hearts. A lot of these weaker top pairs are now checking and then playing defensively. But when the ace comes on the turn, it's nice to have them as well, because it's good to have some of the trips to defend with, knowing that your opponent's range is fairly trip heavy at this stage. Looking at almost 25% of the range is 3 of a kind compared to only 13% of the range. Equity dropping off significantly for the small blind, and that makes sense because there's a lot of bluffs on the flop, given the big pot size bet. So big pot size bet, very, very polar. And now if you got sort of like a boat or a straight, you're still ahead of the trips. You're just potting into the opponent. Your opponents are going to be calling with all their trips because those trips block a lot of the boats. And then all the straights, and obviously just calling with a boat, no raising because the range is so polar. Doesn't really make sense to raise. And then sort of like a river brick. The hand kind of plays itself on the river here. Stack 73, pot 54, just ripping it in with the boats, ripping it in with the straights, ripping it in with the trips. And the only real trips that there is the ace king because of the polarity on the turn. And then it's just bluffing and then check, and then basically the check is completely give up, so you don't really have to be doing too much. So the hand plays itself there. But if in the check line, your opponent bets quarter pot, opponent bets quarter pot, why are they betting quarter pot? Because your range is very polar on the flop. And betting small, the intention is to deny equity from all the draws that you've got. So here, the out of position player on the turn after the pot size bet in their checking range, the checking range is very, very weak. It's just got loads of gut shots and missed draws and missed pairs and stuff. And then very few hands up at the top here to kind of defend that. So check, bet small makes sense when you're in position, betting pretty small to deny equity from a polar range with a lot of draws and a few traps. There's no real middling hands in the small blinds range, so betting big doesn't make sense because you end up just folding out all the worst hands and you just give money to the traps. So betting small is good because you end up protecting yourself in terms of not putting too much money in if your opponent has the trap and still efficiently denies equity from your opponent's draws. So there you go, bet quarter pot. All the straights are raising, all the trips are going for the raise, all the full houses are going for the raise. ace queen trapping sometimes and ace king trapping sometimes. Decent to have some traps in the river because because the 50% rule is going to be more than going to be betting more than half the time on the river, and you can just check jam with the boat and ace king, right? And if you get ripped into, you're just calling your boats there. Yeah. Well, what else is there? Some queen x, king x, sorry, jack x. So yeah, the range is pretty weak here. What has followed out? A lot of these gut shots without any additional equity has followed it out. Gut shots with a flush draw still continuing. And then some of these middle pairs here. Okay, so that's the ace in the spot size bet line. We can have a look at the queen and the jack now. Let's have a look at the queen of hearts. Queen of hearts not doing so well for the small blind because small blind doesn't have quite as many queen x in the big blind. Similarly with the jack, not doing so well. Like the equity goes all the way down to 37% on a jack. So let's have a look at the jack first, just because it's quite contrasted to the ace. Yeah, so checking a lot. All the draws are missed for the small blind here, and this is the jack of clubs, so there's no backdoor flush draws that have come in. It's a pretty bad card for the small blind's range. The small blind can still like keep betting when they've got a very strong hand. A lot of the time, it's going to be going for a check raise either here or on the next street. So checking, and then in position players just going to be betting a lot to deny equity from all of these draws. Remember, there's a lot of draws on the flop, and now when it goes brick here, a lot of those draws have just missed. They still have a little bit of equity, so it's important to try to deny that by betting into it. So, for example, the draws that you're trying to deny equity from are some of these king x type hands, some of these weaker top pairs and middle pair type hands that can outdraw the trip jack still by pairing the board, and all of those gut shots and open enders. When the gut shot comes in, we'll be able to outdraw any kind of ace or queen. So betting small, pretty high check raise frequency. Check raise frequency a lot with the straight, a lot with the boat, a lot of these two pairs, but all these top pairs, even ace king, are just going for the check call. River brick, check, and then your opponent is betting 1.5 times a pot with trips or stronger into the small blind, which kind of makes sense because after it goes for the check call and the river's a brick, there's the small one's range is pretty more mergy with a lot of these top pairs, which we discussed earlier on the flop. Some of those top pairs make it into this line to be able to defend here. Otherwise the big blind will overfold against that big. Will basically just not be betting here for this kind of size at any kind of frequency, and then you won't really get any value with some of your very strong hands. Okay, so take a look at another line. When it goes check, and there's a brick, some of the top pairs are now betting small as a block on the river. And in the check raise line, the check raise, these check raise lines are very polar. So the rivers kind of play themselves when you're in a position. Depends what hands you're check raising and what the composition is. So here, when we've got a lot of two pairs in this check raise, because this bet is very small, there's going to be a lot of just random top pairs and weak hands to deny themselves. When you go for this check raise and then you call, these two pairs are now playing defense. Ace king is playing defense, and the straights and the boats are betting big, or betting all in, and check. And then if you face a bet, your two pairs are now and top pairs are now indifferent. But if it goes check, a lot of the time your opponent will be checking back top pair, and so your two pair and an ace king will have gotten their value by going for that check raise on the turn there. And even some of these queen X there. Okay, so that's a bit of a discussion about. Sorry, this video's gone for so long, but I wanted to get both the flush draw and the pair turn. Sorry, the flush draw turn cards and the pairing turn cards into this video. In the next tutorial, we'll be looking at connected mid. So we'll go through and discuss a lot of the connected mid, the flop strategy, and then in the videos after that, we'll be looking at some of the turn and river runouts to help you guys better play some of these connected mid boards. So thanks for watching this video, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye now.